As you heard, my name is Sergeant Purtee. I joined the Army back in July 2003. The reasons for me joining the Army and choosing the Army was I was already married, had one kid, and job was a little bit rough, hard to keep a steady job. And I had two cousins in the military and two uncles in the military. And they talked me into considering the military. Went through and did a lot of research as far as what branch I was interested in. Asked everybody that I knew that was in the military or had been in the military which jobs were best in their mind or provided a more stable transition into the civilian world thereafter. And after discussion, I decided on Army aviation, going into either avionics or hydraulics. Whenever I first went down to MEPS, they had originally had me signed up for an aircraft electrician, and the AIT wait, or the basic training wait time for that would be 6 months, give or take. I told them that wasn't quite good enough. I needed something a little sooner. So they gave me it's now 94 Romeo. It's a intermediate level avionics technician, and I could leave in 2 weeks for basic right after signing in MEPS. So I went with that. Flew out to basic training in early August of 2003, and that was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Stayed there, completed my training there, took a bus ride over to Fort Gordon, Georgia to do my now 94 Romeo, at the time I believe it was 32 Romeo course, which was 92 weeks. I got there at the end of October there in Fort Gordon. And after I completed my first 6 weeks, my family was able to move out with me. So whenever I took my Christmas leave, I went back to Arizona and took my family, and we all moved out to Georgia until my training was complete in June. Upon completion of that training, I joined my unit in Phoenix, Arizona, and started as a temporary federal technician, because I was in the National Guard. So temporary federal technician as a aircraft electrician. Did that post for a little while, and then someone approached me, Staff Sergeant Taylor, I believe is what his name was, approached me and said that I might want to consider what they called ALSI. At the time I had no idea what it was. I told him sure. He sent me up to the office, and I started to learn the basics of ALSI, Aviation Life Support Equipment. Practiced in there pretty much for a couple months, and then they sent me to the ALSI school. Because of my previous experience in ALSI, I did rather well. Got medal for that, and then came back and we had what's called an arms inspection, which is for the National Guard. And it normally happens every 3 years. It's an inspection team comes in from another state and reviews your program, make sure you're within regulations, make sure that everything's operating correctly. And whenever I got back home from ALSI school, we had an arms inspection a month later. And I got commendable on that, so that kind of got the commander's attention and was a contributing factor in getting me into a full-time ALSI slot in Phoenix, Arizona. I stayed there all the way up until 2010. But in 2006, my National Guard unit was transferred down to Marana, Arizona, which they housed the Apaches down there. We worked on Black Hawks and OH-58s up in Phoenix. So whenever my National Guard transferred down there, I had to drive down for drill down to Marana every month. And then ended up getting divorced through a series of unfortunate events in June of 2006. And thankfully, good Lord had his hand on it, and I was scheduled for a deployment in August of 2006. So deployment came at a good time. I deployed with the unit out of Marana, and we went to, it was a small unit, and at first we went to Fort Hood, Texas, did a little bit of green training there, and then we went over to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and joined up with the 82nd Airborne there, and then deployed over to Fob Salerno, Afghanistan, And whenever we first got there, me and my first line leader didn't quite agree whenever we were going through training. So the chain of command saw fit to put me in, it's called SPO, Support Operations, which is, I was an E4 at the time, and that Support Operations position was an E6 position.